Deion Sanders and Colorado. They're hot on the recruiting trail, but how hot are they? We're going to talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borwood, and joining me today is our new recruiting analyst, Brian Smith. Brian, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Doing well, sir. Thank you very much for having me. Anxious to talk a little Colorado football.
Happy to have you. Like Brian said, we're going to be talking about Deion Sanders' recruiting presence. We're going to give you some updates on key recruits, and then we're going to talk about recruits to look out for if you're a Buffs fan. But before we do, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Okay, Brian, let's dive right into the nitty-gritty. Coach Prime, as we call him here on this podcast, has been quite the name out there in the recruiting trail, especially in your home state of Florida. If you look at all the prospects or the recruits he's offered, the numbers go as follows. They offer California, Texas, and Florida the most. And so can you kind of talk about his, presence on the recruiting trail, his presence in Florida, and kind of just talk about his overall vibe on the recruiting trail, if you will?
Everybody here in Florida just calls him Deion.
Okay.
Prime.
Gotcha.
He was involved with Under Armour for a long time with the Under Armour camp series, like at the All-Star game. We used to talk to him when we went to Orlando, they would have the practices for the All-Stars and stuff. And he would talk to you about technique and who's better and, all the after. He's a football guy. I got to know him just briefly. I don't know him, he wouldn't recognize me, but I've talked to him a few times about kids, and I can see why people gravitate to him. And the people in this state, because he played at Florida State, he's from North Fort Myers High School. He was the third pick of the draft. He's got all the things that you look for. And he fits today's recruiting genre of the social media, obviously. Deion's all about some Deion. He likes to talk about himself and what he's going to do, and he's trying to back it up. What do they got now? 51 guys out of the portal. They've got kids from Georgia and California, et cetera, from the high school ranks. It's a really unique thing, and there's never I've followed recruiting since 1990. There's never been anything quite like him in terms of a guy that was a former player that was that good. He was a top 5 player in the NFL at one point. And now he's a college football coach at a program that's trying to resurrect itself. Right. So it is the most unique phenomenon I've ever seen. But here in Florida in particular, he has a buzz. The only question I have, and it's the same one I'm sure that you and Buff fans have, how can they come out of the gate this year? Their schedule was brutal. They play, if I remember right, TCU first. Yep. If they can do anything early on, especially Florida kids, Georgia kids, somebody farther away, you'll see some of those kids start taking official visits regardless of whether or not they're committed to Georgia Tech or Louisville, Florida State, whatever. But right now, he just has their attention. They want to see the product on the field. That's remember talking to kids and talking to people. That's the thing. And I don't blame them. Nobody knows anything about Colorado here. Most of the kids in Florida, and I'm not exaggerating, if you put out a map of the United States, they had to have no idea which one California is.
It's fun. It's
Florida live in a small bubble, very small.
I'm from California. I moved to Connecticut for 1 year graduate school. I had no idea where it was on the map. You focus on kind of your own state, and especially if you're in a bigger state like California or Florida, like yourself, we're in our own little world. We got everything we need. You just drive 2 hours in a different direction, and you're in a different environment. But one thing I thought was interesting about Deion and Coach Prime taking over is, are recruits kind of shying away, or at least I won't say nervous, but he has a personality. Is there a notion that regardless of how good you are, you're never going to be as famous as your coach?
I've never heard anybody say that, but I think they look at it from the NFL perspective, just from the kids I talk to.
Right, yeah.
Now, Florida kids fit Deion in the following sense. It's the most difficult state to recruit because the kids here are very difficult to get in with. They're more defensive than in any other state. They don't let people in their inner circle that well, but Deion's from here. So they know him, they trust him a little. It's different for him. And he's a South Florida guy being from Fort Myers. Yeah. It's a different deal. I don't think they're going to matter as much here. Now, in other states, I can't speak to it. Maybe there's some. But Florida kids and even Georgia kids, they're really confident. I don't think that's going to matter to them. Gotcha. They just want Deion to help them be as good as they can to get a chance to eventually be drafted. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not a difficult thing. It's a forest for the trees for some people. Don't make it that difficult.
Right.
They want to go to the NFL, and he's been there, and he proclaims to say, this is the process. This is how you do it. So we're going to see if he can do that.
Yeah, and I think my last question for this topic before we move on, how many conversations have you had with recruits that obviously, well, we know they're not familiar with where Colorado is located,
Right.
but everybody knows Colorado has snow. It does not snow in Florida that I'm aware of, or at least not throughout the whole entire state. Has there been any comments about the climate or the altitude that maybe have had some recruits shy away?
A little bit, but again, most of the kids don't know much about it. Like I talked to Cormani about it because I know him. I live close to where he's at, etc. If you're really good, you're eventually going to end up playing in crappy weather. Like the Buffalo Bills, it's not real friendly there. Okay,
Right.
The Green Bay Packers, it sucks there. Cleveland Browns, it sucks there. And I'm sure that's something he's going to sell. Deion didn't like playing in cold either, but he eventually played for the Ravens and the Redskins. Both of those organizations are in the state of Maryland. That is not friendly. So these kids don't really care that much about it. They'll mention it, but a chance to play Power 5 football for him, I think, is way, way higher up. I don't think it matters that much.
So to conclude this segment, Coach Prime in Colorado, their presence is out there. Kids are interested. They just want to see the on-field product. Is that what we're gathering, Brian? They just want to see some what the team looks like.
They need to see the organization and how they're operating. It's one thing to win at Jackson State. It's another to win in the Big 12. So, it's another thing to win in the Big 10 and SEC and Pac-12. Right. That's what they're trying to do that now. That's Pac-12 is not dominant by any means, but it's still Power 5 football. They want to see how he can adjust to all the different things, media included, which he's outspoken. So they'll be every one of his interviews will be the most watched in the country.
Absolutely. That's for certain. That's the only thing we do know about Coach Prime in Colorado. What we also know is that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 and bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel's great. They have promotions every day, safe, secure, and super easy to use. They get paid instantly. You don't have to worry about your money not coming through. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, Brian, back to it. We talked about kind of Deion Sanders and his presence overall. Let's talk about specific recruits. We kind of talked about it pre-show. There's Boo Carter, who just recently announced his commitment date, which is June 17th. There's Cai Bates, Mincey from Florida as well, Zavier Mincey. Can you kind of give us an update on where Colorado stands, if they have any ground to make up? Just go off. Tell us about these recruits because 2 of them reside in Florida, if you guys did not know.
Yeah, Boo Carter is from Tennessee, but he's recruited nationally. I was watching his film just for fun again yesterday. Holy cow, is that kid athletic. I can see why Deion would gravitate to him. Not that he's as fast as Deion was. We're talking about a guy that ran a 4.2. But this kid is electric. He could play running back, slot, corner, whatever you wanted him to. The rumor on the street is he'll end up at home state Tennessee, but his list is all over the place, Colorado included, Michigan. I don't know for sure. I don't know him personally like I do all the Florida kids, but that's a very unique recruitment. And something tells me that the commitment date doesn't matter because he'll probably end up taking, like if Deion calls him in October, he's going to take the call. So I don't really care who he commits to. It looks pretty on paper.
Right.
But I don't think that's going to matter much. Deion flipped Cormani last year and he'd been committed for a couple months. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So. That's kind of my saying and just overall mindset. If pen hasn't been put to paper yet, which they can't put it to paper until signing day, there's still time for Prime. It's kind of been my saying out here. Also, the interesting thing about Boo Carter, I wanted to get your perspective on this. Obviously, like you said, he could play everywhere. That's kind of been a pitch at Colorado. Come here, play both ways. Aaron Butler, they kind of want him to do so. Cormani McClain, they plan on using him at little receiver. Travis Hunter. Is that something that most recruits are looking forward to, or is that only some guys want to do that?
I don't think a lot of guys are capable, number one, but it's something that's been brought up. I live right down the street from Lakeland where Cormani is. So that was something I talked to some of the guys there at that high school and stuff. They think it's interesting, but most coaches just don't offer it. There's no comparison to it. I mean, there's only been a couple of guys in college football history to really do it, if then, at a major program. So,
Right.
I mean, if they can get one or both of Cormani and a certain guy named Travis Hunter to do well with that this year, that opens the door. They need somebody to like really have a big play on defense and then turn around. He catches a screen and goes 50 yards for a touchdown. They need something like that to solidify it, because talk is cheap. But I mean, Travis Hunter is as twitchy a kid as I've seen since I had the chance to see Allen Iverson in high school. So he's the best high school basketball player I ever watched. But that was ridiculous. But there's a lot of different players that say they want to play both ways. But number one, you got to be able to learn a playbook. And number two, there aren't many Travis Hunters walking around either. So let's keep that in mind. So
that's just been
I think it'll happen.
I think that's been a curiosity of mine, because I feel like that's a major selling point, because I had a little segment where I tried to name top two-way stars within the past 5 or 6 years. And I got Miles Jack, Adoree Jackson, Peppers from Michigan, kind of. There's not that many. The list is at like 5, maybe. There's probably a defensive lineman here or there that could flip or a linebacker that could play running back or whatever, but there's not many. Someone in your neck of the woods, Cai Bates from Edgewater. He just announced his top 10 about a weekish ago. Where do Colorado stand with him? Do they have any ground to make up?
That is one of my favorite kids here in the state of Florida. Great kid, number one. He plays at Edgewater, which is in the middle of Orlando. Program that's always going against top programs from around the country. They played a school last year from New Jersey and whipped them. I mean, one of the top ranked schools in New Jersey. Right. That is a school you want to recruit if you're Colorado. They've always got 1 or 2 kids every year that are just good to go wherever they want. Cedric Baxter signed from Texas at Edgewater last year. He was the best running back in the country. Yep. They have made their inroads with him, but I don't think he knows much about the program. I would call Colorado in a holding pattern. I mean, he's got Alabama he just visited. He's got Florida State. He's got Tennessee. He's got all these schools after him. Colorado needs to get him on campus for an official. If I was Deion, I would wait and do it later this year, because he's a Florida kid and they're more of what have you done for me lately. I would try to get him as late as I could in the process. But Kai's a really open-minded guy. He won't care about location, or he's not a typical Florida kid in that regard. He won't mind about location as much as some of the other Florida kids. He's not care about snow and all that. They got a shot. Where exactly, I won't know until he goes out to Boulder, because you can't really get any different a demographic in terms of landscape from Florida to Colorado.
Right.
They have nothing in common.
It was why his first in class was so impressive. Top 20 class with most of the kids not seeing the state, the school at all. That makes it more impressive.
It was really unique, to say the least.
Yeah, and then last kid that we're going to talk about, Zavier Mincey, another Florida guy. He also released a top 10, very similar to Bates, had a lot of the typical SEC schools and schools that you would kind of expect. Where does Colorado land with him? Is he someone that they also need to get on for an official visit?
That last part is the key. The schools that are allegedly, for whatever it's worth, I haven't talked to him in the last few months, but Florida State are allegedly trending with him. He's visiting Miami. He's got all the schools down south after him. But you're talking about a kid that's 6'2" that can play corner. That's as rare as it gets, brother. And that's why Deion likes him. He's a lot like Cai. They're big kids. He's probably a little taller than Cai. I love the kid's upside. He could play free safety for you. He could play slot. I don't know, since I talked to him last, like Colorado has come into the picture, I don't know where they stand. So I'm just going to go with the same thing I said about the other kids. Got to get him on campus. He's a Florida kid from Daytona Beach. You talk about polar opposite. I mean, he's a beach kid. Yeah. Now you're talking about going to visit Colorado. I have no idea what he's going to think of that, but that's what's cool about it. Like,
it's a tough
Colorado's never recruited Florida kids, at least successfully. So,
that's the exciting part. And before I continue with my next question, I want to thank all the listeners, my everydayers, for tuning in every day, commenting, liking, subscribing. We appreciate you guys. Make sure to do that so we can have more great interviews with Brian and other people like this, to continue talking about the Florida difference between Colorado. I think the one thing that I said, Deion, his issues will be he's just going to recruit guys that sometimes they want to play at a SEC school, or they want to stay in state, Miami, Florida State, Florida, whatever, maybe UCF. Now that they're in the Big 12 is kind of, I've seen they're appearing in a lot more top 10s than like for top recruits, more than they would in prior years. So what is the biggest challenge that he's going to face with specifically these Florida and Georgia kids, because obviously they're way over there. California kids are we're used to going out. We're used to having to be pried away from the state. But what about these Florida kids who are used to staying in the South?
They need to be looked at a little bit differently. You got to prove it to kids down south.
Okay.
There's a kind of an attitude here about the football in the South being way better than anywhere else. So Colorado I know it's going to be probably a rough year, but they got to show some kind of improvement on the field, and they could be the difference that gets them over the hump. All the kids are really well aware that where Deion is. I can assure you that. It's come up numerous times. Now it's just about on the field. The only problem with that is all these visits are happening now. It's cart before the horse. So I think that they're going to be more successful with visits they have during game days, so kids can physically see the campus, who comes out, what it's like, how the organization's operated, with Deion having a headset on. Until then, they just got to get to know them and build relationships. That part never changes. I've had all kinds of coaches tell me that some of the best recruiters, it's the same answer. Relationships are what recruiting about. It's not the logo on the shirt. The alumni base doesn't want to hear that, but that's not what kids pick. They pick the coaches,
right?
Not your school. That's
the one rule coaches or media members always like to say: don't pick the coach, pick the program or whatever. It's like that will never happen. That never happens. That's why we have the transfer portal and the one-time transfer rule, because kids do in fact pick the coach, as we saw with Coach Prime, bringing in over 50 transfers. Lastly, we're going to move on, but we're going to talk about the recruits to look out for. We're going to talk about that when we come back. Welcome back. We are here to talk about recruits to look out for if you're a Buffs fan. They've offered quite a few people, Brian. I'm looking at the list right now on 24/7. The numbers: 62 Texans, 60 Californians, 53 Floridians. Did I get that right? Are you Floridians? I've never said it. I just went for it. Who's someone that may surprise people in Colorado's recruiting bubble?
I would say their best bet, and you've talked about this, would be your home state.
Gotcha.
Colorado, when they were really good in the 80s and into the early 90s, they killed it all across from San Diego to north of San Francisco. For whatever reason, the California kids would do really well. They had one class one year, they had 10 kids from California when I was a kid. So I don't know why, but that staff did well. But Colorado is considered to be a part of the West. I think it's just more familiarity. So I'm going to guess kids like somebody like Aiden Breland, defensive lineman out of Mater Dei. Kids like that. One of these kids that's an elite top 100 kid is going to surprise people. Even though he could have went to Alabama, he could have went to Oregon, he could have went to Texas. He's going to pick Colorado. I have no idea which one it's going to be because Deion is random. I mean, they got the two kids from Valdosta that were committed early on. And it's just, how can you possibly predict that? Because those two kids are really good.
Yeah.
And, South Georgia kids don't go to Colorado. They just don't. They don't even think about it. They don't even know where the hell Colorado's at. They don't care. So when I saw that pop up, I'm like,
a California guy, the Golden State. We're probably going to produce a few Colorado Buffs. Can you kind of touch on he's expanding his recruiting net. He's looking at he's looking at Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, California. Can you kind of touch on what that does for him? And will that kind of come back to bite him if this class doesn't wrap up as he'd like?
I don't think it'll bother him. Like, let's just say they sign 18 kids and it's not 2022. Because of how Colorado has attacked the transfer portal, and there's no real limit on that. It's not as big a deal because he couldn't recruit like this if it wasn't for the portal. Let me be very clear. He'd be in deep trouble. But at the same time, the roster has basically been purged and they're flipping it over. They're going to take a very selective look at the high school kids. They're not going to try to take a bunch of developmental guys.
Right.
Either you're really good or you fit like a niche, maybe like a kicker's not ranked high, but that's a kicker. Interior O lineman or something. Okay. But for the most part, they're going to take high-end guys or they're just going to go to the portal. So I'm not real worried about where he's recruiting and misses, because if you don't put yourself in a position to get the kid, you were never in the game anyway. Right. There's no penalty for it. So, yeah, with the portal, I'm not worried about that at all. I think he's doing the right thing because they need a massive talent influx. It's not a newsflash.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting that I talked about yesterday's episode. I did realistic expectations, which not everybody was a fan of my realistic expectations for Colorado. I think 5 to 6 wins.
You did your job.
5 to 6 wins would be a great year. Throw the parade. Anything over that, we're throwing like, I don't even know, a full on party in the state of Colorado. But the Colorado fans are confident. They're confident in all these transfer portal guys. A question I wanted to ask you that I forgot to touch on earlier. We talked about their success in the transfer portal. How does that affect their high school recruiting standings? Do high school coaches are they bothered by his usage of their portal? I've seen some people say that it could affect his relationship with coaches, but obviously he's Coach Prime. Everyone loves him. So what is the feedback you've gotten from coaches and players about his transfer portal usage?
Everybody's kind of shocked at like the total number, but people also see what Colorado's record's been over the last decade.
Right.
Let's be honest. If you're Deion, what were your options?
Yeah, it's tough.
I mean,
I've been talking about it. I think everybody wanted him to come in and develop this 1-11 team like it was a movie from the early 2000s where like Coach Carter or something, where he just comes in and inherits a bad team and all of a sudden everything's good and dandy. And I think people just weren't ready for the transfer portal to be used like this. I've said it thousands of times and I'll say it again. Everybody was excited for the kids to get free movement, but nobody realized that someone, Coach Prime this time, is going to use that movement against them and be like, hey, you're eligible right away. Go transfer, get out so I can bring in someone better. And I don't think people were ready for that.
Yeah, I agree. He's purged his roster. He has over 50 kids that have transferred into the University of Colorado. Mm-hmm. And I don't think many people understood because there's no limits. Like high school kids, there's a limit. But they're in a situation where they needed to change the roster to meet his expectations. Hmm. Coach Carter and all that, that's great. But Colorado is a 3 to 5 win team at best this year if he didn't do all that. And it still may take a while because, you got chemistry, but at least he has pieces. Year 2 is when you got to start judging Deion, not year 1. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, year 1 anywhere is hard. Now have 50 plus new players out of the portal plus high school kids. There are going to be some moments that it's going to look like a Chinese fire drill. I guarantee it. And nobody wants to hear that it's a Buffs fan, but that's just part of it. Football has 85 players on scholarship at max. That is a lot of moving parts, bro. It's hard for college basketball coaches. And what do they got, 15 or something like that? It's not even close. Yeah. So I don't think we're going to be able to judge them.
Basketball's easier to mesh. Basketball's easier to mesh. They could go play pickup. You could play pickup football, but it's like you're just playing catch. You can't really go down to the park and play a bunch of random guys in football. Basketball, which D1 teams, I've seen D1 teams do this when I was back east. They'll go out and hang out together and they just show up to a random park and all of a sudden you're playing against a team where everybody's really tall and I'm just out here trying to get some cardio in and all of a sudden people are throwing alley-oops. It gets dangerous out there. Let me tell you, it does. But I think Colorado has a long way to go. Recruiting is definitely going to pick up. Their class currently ranks in the high 40s. I think they're 42nd. I think it'll pick up. And Brian, if I had to speak for you, I would guess that number will pick up once they start seeing the on-field product, excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I wouldn't commit there without seeing what they're going to do this fall, but that's just my personality. Mm-hmm. And I also think that they'll have quite a few visits for kids that commit this summer to schools, other places, Georgia Tech or whatever, and then they'll visit Colorado in the fall. It's just part of the process that they've got to go through. They got to flip kids. It's what he did last year. And with his personality, Deion Sanders, they'll be fine.
Okay, over under. We'll go. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I did not prepare Brian for this question. It's not that hard, Brian. I promise. Over under top 15 class. So they're gonna have a 15 or above, or they're gonna be in the 16 to 25 range.
I would say 16 to 25 because I think he'll be really picky about the number of kids he takes.
Gotcha.
Because he's been so successful with the portal. Again, the recruiting ranking is not the same value that it used to be. But we didn't have the portal.
Right.
The only thing that matters is the combination of the two, but nobody ranks the two. Mm-hmm. So at least not well. So I'm not real worried about what Deion's ranking is in recruiting. I would prefer that he took less high school kids right now for the first 2 years. And then he starts expanding year by year, 20 to 22 every year. But I mean, they just, if he would have done that with the group he had coming in, they'd have been 1-11 this year.
Gotcha.
But,
nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Again, Brian, appreciate you coming on. We had a great time. We'll hope to have you on again, talk more Colorado recruiting as it picks up throughout the year. You guys make sure to follow Brian on Twitter right there. I got his Twitter under his name. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, like, subscribe, share. We just got to 2,000 subs. Let's get to 10,000 by the beginning of the season. That's our ambitious goal, Brian. Don't think I'm crazy. It's ambitious, I know. But if you shoot for the moon or whatever, you fall in the stars, or whatever the saying is. I appreciate you for coming on. You guys have a great rest of your day and have a great Tuesday.